Well, it's great to see you here, and I'm going to invite you, if you have a Bible or device, to turn to the book of Nehemiah. If you're new to the Bible, it's about a third of the way in. It's before the book of Psalms. Please use an index if you need to. And the book of Nehemiah is about building a wall. But it's more than just bricks and mortar. It is about the good of people and the glory of God. And as we are now just at the beginning of a building project, a rebuilding project, a renovation project, this book is going to be a lens for us to see how we continue to stay on mission together as we look forward to the future. That together, we as God's people are called to be on mission. Just a reminder to you, I trust if you're a follower of Jesus, and if you're not yet a follower of Jesus, it's the greatest decision you could ever make to give your life, surrender your life to Jesus. But as a follower of Jesus, you were created for a purpose. You're breathing God's air, again, 22,000 breaths roughly every day for a purpose. He's got you here for a reason. That you were created for something more than just the here and now. You were created for something eternal. Something that matters. God made you for a purpose. And that purpose is found in living for His glory. And even as a follower of Jesus, you have to daily make the decision, am I going to live for His glory or am I going to live for myself? And we are often told again and again, live for yourself. And it's interesting, I'm going back a few decades here, but I was told, here's the purpose of your life. You know, the narrative that culture gives you. Here's the narrative of your life. And it's changed a couple times over the decades. Do you know what it is now? Personal happiness. That's the goal of your life. You do what you need to do so you can be happy. Live for yourself and personal happiness. Once you chase this, once you pursue this, once you get this, then you'll be happy. The problem is nothing in this world that God created can satisfy your soul. Only God can satisfy your soul. So if you chase and you pursue happiness, you're never ultimately going to experience it. There'll be times where you go up and down, but it is so elusive. Happiness, and this is not just from the Bible, this is empirical research, happiness is a byproduct of two things, love and service. God made you to love people and to be in loving relationships, and God made you to serve. And when you are experiencing both of those things, your personal happiness will increase. It is a byproduct. And that's why empirical research shows that being religious, and in particular, going to church, you're happier than if you don't go to church. Because often in church, you'll find people that are in loving relationships. I hope you have somebody here at the church that's a friend, and you're loving relationships, but you're also involved in serving, for living for God and not for yourself. So as we begin the book of Nehemiah, he and others are on a mission. And may this book speak to you and me that we too would move forward together on a mission. Now, as we open the book of Nehemiah, we see this guy crying and weeping. And as we work through chapter 1, all 11 verses today, we're going to see that if you are living for the glory of God like Nehemiah, you will find yourself at times brokenhearted. There's going to be times that you're just like, Lord, and you begin to pray, and you're in a sense weeping. If you in your life have no burdens, if you have no prayers there, then maybe, nothing really bothers you, then maybe it might be that you're living for yourself. Because when you live for the glory of God, you're going to experience what we call divine agitation, a holy discontent. This is not right. This is not good. So let's begin Nehemiah chapter 1. And again, we're working through all 11 verses. The words of Nehemiah, son of Hakaliah, in the month of Kislev, in the 20th year, while I was in the citadel of Susa, Hanani, one of my brothers, came from Judah with some other men, and I questioned them about the Jewish remnant that had survived the exile, and also about Jerusalem. Okay, so everybody got that? Okay, as Nehemiah opens his story, we want to ask the question, okay, who is he? Where is he? When does this story take place? And what's the story about? So notice first the time. It's the month of Kislev, early December, while I was in the 20th year. So when does this story take place? It goes back to the 20th year of the reign of King Artaxerxes. He's a Persian king in human history. And Nehemiah was in that time period. So 20 years. So we are going back 2,000 years to the time of Christ, and then another 445 years to the time of the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, the king of Persia. Now, where is Nehemiah? Notice there, he's in the citadel of Susa. Where is Susa? Here we are in, oh my goodness, geography, I'm better with the map. Okay, does everybody know where Israel is? Jerusalem, Israel? Okay, there we go. Jerusalem, Israel is here. If you go east, you're going to run into Babylon. That's Iraq, modern-day Iraq. And if you go another 200 or so miles east, you're going to run into Persia, into Iran. That's where Susa is, okay? So this is taking place, really, in what we know today as Iran. And here is Nehemiah, and what's he doing in the royal palace of King Artaxerxes in Susa? He's going to tell us in his book, he is a cupbearer to the king. He was the guy, now sometimes we think cupbearer to the king, he's one of those expendable laboratory rats, like he's the guy that drinks the wine or eats the food, and if it's good, the king, is going to live. If it's bad, he's going to die. But the job description of a cupbearer was keeping the king alive. And we think today, really? The king that needed to be kept alive? Okay, there are some world leaders today that need to be kept alive. They have security detail. In that day, ancient kings, King Artaxerxes at this time, like other kings, lived in constant fear because there were always plots to overthrow whoever was ruling. In fact, what is very fascinating to me, if we go from 445 BC, 500 years forward to the time of the Romans and the emperors, you've got about 70 Roman emperors, and almost 70%, 60 to 70% of those Roman emperors died by execution, assassination, poisoning, or in battle. Okay, you think it was great being an emperor. Oh no. Only 20 to 30% died a natural death. So the cupbearer was someone that was looking out for the king. His job was to keep the king alive, but it was a trusted position. The king had to trust this guy. Nehemiah was a man of character. He was trustworthy. He, in fact, was like an advisor, a chief of staff. He was in the palace, the citadel, and he was constantly rubbing shoulders with the king. So he was an advisor, but he also had direct access to the king. So that's where our story begins. Now, what's it about? Notice the word exile and the word Jerusalem. He's over here in Susa, 1,000 miles, 1,600 kilometers from Jerusalem. And he talks about the exile. Okay, as we begin the story, I'm going to give you just a little history. We often do this when we start a book. And I'm going to, after I give you a little history, tell you why history is good for us as we study through God's Word. So if you look at this kind of timeline of history, right here is where Jesus died and rose again. Died on the cross, rose from the tomb. And that's the greatest events in human history. We right here are looking back at that, and we are awaiting the second return of Jesus Christ. Well, God has revealed to us in His Word that His eternal plan has always been redemption, to redeem back a people for Himself. And so in the beginning, we're not sure how long ago God created the world. There's a discussion with that. How old is the earth? We're not sure that when the first man and first woman lived. We're not sure about that. That's a conversation. But we do know that the first man and the first woman, they sinned, and because of their sin, death and suffering entered into our experience. But God's plan was to send His Messiah all along, the Redeemer, the one who would save us from our sins, die on a cross for us. That was his plan all along. But before Jesus died on the cross, God revealed to us that his plan involved a nation, the nation of Israel. It involved a covenant with the nation of Israel. So that begins with Abraham, and we know he goes back 4,000 years ago, 2000 BC, and God calls him, and he goes to the land of Israel, and eventually they make their way, the Jews, down to Egypt because there's a lack of food in Israel, and then Egypt, they're enslaved for years, and then Moses leads them out, the Exodus. They exit out of Egypt, then through the desert, then they come into Israel again, and you've got the kings, David and Solomon. The kingdom divides, so the kingdom of Israel divides, and then here is the exile. And that happens, we know, in 586 BC, when King Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, he comes in and he destroys Jerusalem, and Israel becomes a vassal state. They lose their sovereignty, and they are now under King Nebuchadnezzar. Okay, so they lose their sovereignty. Pardon me, but they're the 51st state of Babylon. It's worse than that. And as King Nebuchadnezzar is king, he deports over 50,000 Jews from Jerusalem to Babylon. So there is this exile. Actually, the exile began in 605, but 586 was when he destroyed Jerusalem. So in the exile, these people are away, the Jews are away from their homeland. But during this exile, we see next is the return. After King Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians conquer Israel, and they were like the world superpower, Babylon was conquered by the Persians and King Cyrus, the first Persian king. Then it was the Greeks, and then it was the Romans. And here's where our story, just for context, it's during the Persian rule of the world. King Cyrus, when he became king, they conquered King Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonians. When he became king, he was a different kind of king, ruler of the world, than Nebuchadnezzar. And he wanted deported peoples to be able to go back to their homeland. They were all vassal states, so go back, make your homeland better under my rule. And so he allowed the Jews, if they wanted to go back to Jerusalem. From Susa, Babylon, this area, all the way back to Jerusalem. In 539, he issues that edict. In fact, I don't know if I've mentioned this, but the Cyrus cylinder is in the British Museum in London, England, if you want to see it. And on it, it talks about this edict allowing people to go back. So this is real human history. So Nehemiah is in Susa. He's working for the king. He hears news. One of his brothers, whether it was his biological brother or a fellow Jew, he and some others come back from the homeland in Jerusalem, and they tell him about it. He asks questions like, how are they doing? And the news is not what Nehemiah wants to hear. Verse 3. They said to me, those who survived the exile and are back in the province are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates have been burned with fire. He's in Susa. Nehemiah, our fellow Jews in Jerusalem, the conditions are appalling. Now, again, just a little more history. But when King Cyrus issued that edict that Jews could go home if they wanted to, many stayed, but some returned. There was a first wave under a guy called Zerubbabel, and that was the wave of about 50,000. Following that, and that was 100 years before Nehemiah. Following that, about 15 years before Nehemiah, was Ezra. He leads a second wave. And Nehemiah, in our story a little later, he's going to lead a third wave. But the first wave, and then the second, but some of these people in Jerusalem had been there for over 100 years. And from the book of Ezra, we know that they first built an altar And then they rebuilt the temple. The first temple that was built by King Solomon was full of splendor. It was huge. It was destroyed by King Nebuchadnezzar. Second temple was much smaller. It would later be renovated and expanded, but it was a smaller temple. They'd started the walls, but because of opposition, that had come to a standstill, and they just carried on with their lives. And Nehemiah's told that these people are in great trouble and disgrace. They're demoralized. They're not doing well. Why aren't they doing well? Because the wall of Jerusalem is broken down. Now, for us, when we read about the walls broken down and the gates going in to the city are still burned, we think, what's the big deal with that? Walls in the ancient world represented protection. If you go back in human history, people group after people group are fighting one another, and if you don't have walls to protect your city, you're defenseless, you're vulnerable. And so that's why Jerusalem, it was built on hills. They put walls around Jerusalem. But Nebuchadnezzar had come and broken those walls down. So the walls represented safety, security, serenity, peace. No walls meant no protection. Now, to put it in our context, imagine us, building a wall around Elmira. Okay, some of you are from outside within a radius, an hour out. How about an hour out each way? Okay, we build a wall, right, for safety and security. No, we're not going to build a wall, but imagine this. Imagine that we lived in a society where there was no security or safety. So you didn't have locks on your cars or your home. You didn't have police that could apprehend someone. You didn't have your guard dog, whether it was a German Shepherd or a Chihuahua, either one. Like, you're just defenseless. You would live every day in fear. Is someone going to come into my house? Is someone going to take what belongs to me? And because of that fear, you're like hopeless. How can you build a future when you have no safety or security? So that's how the people felt. So no walls. Nehemiah hears that this is bad news because the walls are about protection, they're about people. But the walls are about something else. The walls are also about the glory of God. God had said that my presence, my name, would be in Jerusalem. And Jerusalem and the walls of Jerusalem was connected to their national and religious identity. So broken down walls, in a sense, in that day reflected a broken down God. The people were not right with God. They were just living each day without hope. Things were bad. The conditions were deplorable. The people were demoralized. Nehemiah hears this news, and here's his response. Verse 4. When I heard these things, I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. When I heard these things, I sat down, I began to cry, I began to pray, and I began to fast. Fasting is when we go without food for a certain period of time, and so that we can be more in tune with the Spirit of God and more, Lord, this is serious stuff. So that is his response. He's a cupbearer to the king, and he hears this news about people 1,600 kilometers away. He's never been in Jerusalem. He was born and raised in the exile over here. He's never seen these people, and yet he is crying. How'd that all come about? The guy's living in the palace. He gets to eat royal food. Okay, I got to stop talking about Chick-fil-A and Krispy Kreme donuts, but there they were every day for him if he wanted them. He had a 4K TV, right? He was living in comfort. Why in the world would he care about those people? Because God was stirring in his heart. And Nehemiah, this is very important, Nehemiah chooses to let the pain in. He opens the door and lets the pain of these other people into his heart. he sits down and he begins to cry. Just talking about crying for a minute, weeping, especially our young men. What's a man? Okay. Where's our young men? Okay, over here? Anybody else under 70? Okay. As a young man, you are constantly told, hey, this is a good return if you invest your time and energy in it, your money in it. So, good return on Bitcoin, good return on real estate, good return on whatever it is that you give yourself to. Young people, young men in particular I'm talking to, the best return on any investment you can make is an investment on your character. If you have godly character, that's the best return. It not only serves you in this life, but in the life to come, you'll be rewarded by God. That you want to be a young man who is trustworthy and keeps his word, but also has a heart for people, and in a sense is brokenhearted and may even weep over people. I want to say to you young men, as I've grown up over the years, there's been specific times in my life where I have broken down and cried. And even recently, some things, now we can't let everything in the world into our heart, because when we hear about this tsunami, this earthquake, this war, that, and everything, we're just like, it can kill you. You're not Jesus, it can kill you. You weren't made to handle it all. But if nothing ever gets into your heart, if you never cry, maybe you're living for yourself. When you're living for God, things are going to break your heart. And as a people, different things break our heart. So Nehemiah sits down, he cries, and he mourns, he fasts, and he prays. And here's his prayer, verse 5. Then I said, Lord, the God of heaven, the great and awesome God, who keeps his covenant of love with those who love him and keep his commandments, let your ear be attentive and your eyes open to hear the prayer your servant is praying before you day and night for your servants, the people of Israel. I confess the sins we Israelites, including myself and my father's family, have committed against you. We have acted very wickedly toward you. We have not obeyed the commands, decrees, and laws you gave your servant Moses. Remember the instruction you gave your servant Moses, saying, if you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the nations. But if you return to me and obey my commands, then even if your exiled people are at the farthest horizon, I will gather them from there and bring them to the place I have chosen as a dwelling for my name. They are your servants and your people, whom you redeemed by your great strength and your mighty hand. Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of this your servant and to the prayer of your servants who delight in revering your name. Give your servant success today by granting him favor in the presence of this man. I was cupbearer to the king. Nehemiah hears bad news, and the first thing he does is he turns to God. He begins to weep and pray. You live in a broken world. You're going to hear bad news as you go through life. What's your first response? Have you learned? It takes some time, but have you learned your first response is to turn to God and pray? I know for myself, it's something I've had to learn, and I keep learning over time. But when I turn to God first, and sometimes it's at the end, something happens in the day, and then you go home where you have some time. But when you turn to God first, one of the benefits is that the God of heaven, the God who is in control of all things in the world, in your life, you're turning to the one who is sovereign. One of the benefits is that when something happens and we have bad news, our emotional side of the brain kicks in, and if we're not aware, it can overrule our logical, our thinking side, and sometimes we say, something happens, like, what were they thinking? Well, they weren't. Their emotional side was just ruling. And when you turn to God first and you get alone with him, that your emotional side can slowly slow down as your thinking side. Lord, those two sparrows aren't touching the ground apart from your will. Nothing's happening in my life apart from your will. For some reason, you've allowed it, and it's going to be for my good. I don't like it right now. And so you turn to God first. This is the first of 12 prayers we find in the book of Nehemiah. He is a man of prayer. He's a leader. He casts vision, he strategizes, he delegates, he confronts, he builds, but it's all bathed in prayer. Young men in particular, but all of us, bathe everything you do in prayer. That each day, somehow, somewhere, you're talking to God. And it's more than just, when we go through the day, there's little short prayers like, oh, Lord, so-and-so just said that. Would you help me with this? Lord, I didn't realize this broke. Would you help me with that? Short prayers, we're going to see Nehemiah offering up to God short prayers. But there needs to be a time where we have a discipline where from time to time, and I'd encourage you once a day somewhere, that you're just being still and you're talking to God. And Nehemiah, we're told here, that he was disciplined and he prayed for a time about this matter. It says he prayed day and night. For some time he prayed. Probably, I'm guessing it was a few months that he prayed for this prayer. And it's just a reminder to all of us, when we pray, sometimes God says yes, sometimes God says no to our prayers, and we have to defer to his will by faith. But sometimes God says wait. And it means praying for more than just a day or two. It means you keep praying and you keep praying. And so Nehemiah was praying, and finally the opportunity came, the window for him to then go and talk to the king. One more thing about prayer is that this is, in a sense, you'll find this through different parts of Scripture. It's a model prayer. We can use this. So in your life, you don't want to just keep asking God for stuff. Like, God, give me this. God, I need this. You're in a relationship with God. And encourage you to talk to him in the fullness of that relationship. And one model of prayer that has helped me over the years is the Acts model: adoration, confession, thanksgiving, supplication. We find it here. He begins his prayer, "O Lord, God of heaven, the great and awesome God." He's putting God in his rightful place. Like, God, you're God and I'm not. You're in control of all things. I'm not in control of all things. So I'm going to encourage you to begin your prayer. God, you are great. You are good. You're a God of love. And then notice next, after adoration, is confession. Lord, we've sinned. And he talks about the Mosaic covenant, about when God called out the people of Israel into a conditional covenant, that God said, in this particular covenant, if you obey me as a nation, I'm going to keep you and you're going to be a light to the Gentiles. But if you disobey me, there's going to be judgment and you'll be scattered. And Nehemiah confesses, we have disobeyed you. That's why Jerusalem's here and we're over here 1,600 kilometers away, because you've scattered us. God judged the nation of Israel by allowing the Babylonians to conquer them, and then the Persians, and then the Greeks and the Romans. And your Old Testament, that's what you'll find over and over again, is the people of these people, this nation that was to represent God. They were faithless, they were godless, they were foolish, and God, in this relationship, wanted them to come back to him. And so prophet after prophet he sends, go and call my people back. And so what Nehemiah is praying here is he's like, Lord, we confess, we have done wrong. But you're a God of hope. And you said if we obeyed you, then you would bring us back into the land where your name would dwell. And so that is he confesses. Next, he gives thanks, the whole idea of being the redeemed people. He's grateful they're the redeemed people, referring back to the Exodus. Again, why do we need to understand the story? Or why do we need to understand history? I want to leave you with this. I missed this. There are two key events in the Old Testament that really will help you to be aware of. One is the Exodus, and the second is exile. All of the prophets, they're usually talking about one of those things leading to Christ. Over and over, Exodus, exile. And we say, well, how does that affect me today? Well, Jeremiah 29:11, some of us know it by memory, right? For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. And we read that in Jeremiah 29:11, we're like, does that apply to me? Is that true? Oh, Jeremiah's talking about the exile, that the people are over here, far away from Jerusalem. And Jeremiah prophesies, oh God, you made the promise to bring your people back to the land. And he kept it. in human history, we say, oh my goodness, they went back to the land. And so when God makes a promise to us of going to heaven with him, we say, oh God, you keep your promises. So just to know, Exodus and exile. I know there's a little bit of teaching here. Is everybody okay so far? Okay, got that. So in his prayer, he adores God. God, you're God, I'm not. He confesses sin. And by the way, if you're going through bad times, it doesn't mean that you necessarily have sinned. It could be you live in a fallen world. But there's always the question, Lord, is there anything I've done wrong? And then next is thanksgiving, where you redeem people. And then last is supplication, where he says, Lord, okay, I'm going to go and see the king now. I'm asking you to give me favor when I go to see him. And Nehemiah, we're going to see this next week, is going to ask to be able to go back to Jerusalem, the city in ruins, and rebuild the walls, rebuild the city for the sake of the people and the glory of God. So how does this speak to us today? In verses 3 and 4, Nehemiah, we're told, he hears the news about people in great trouble and disgrace. He opens his heart, he lets the pain in, he cares, and then next week we're going to see him act. He's weeping, not about himself, oh my 4K TV, the audio, what's wrong again? He's not caring about himself. He's caring about these people he's never seen, doesn't really know, but because he's living for the glory of God, he cares. He's burdened. What are you burdened for? What are you praying about? What are you crying about? Again, if nothing burdens your heart when it comes to people, you might be just living for yourself. If you're never bringing people to God, it might be that you're just living for yourself. Yes, the bless this food, keep me safe, pray for a good day, those are okay prayers. We can pray for those. But if that's all the prayer that we, say, when we're living for the glory of God like Nehemiah, people matter. And sometimes we have to let the pain in because there's this divine agitation, this holy discontent. And as I mentioned, sometimes God stirs people's hearts and burdens people's hearts for different things. Maybe today, God has placed a burden on your heart for children who don't know the Bible. And maybe God says, I want you to get involved with Sunday school, teaching or helping. Maybe it's a burden for people just to know the Bible, older people, and God has put a burden. Maybe you could be a life group leader. Maybe you could host a life group. Maybe God has placed a burden on your heart for people with special needs. And maybe you could say, Lord, do you want me to get involved in Friendship Club and helping these adults with special needs? Maybe it's with marriages. God's placed a burden on marriages and challenges and people struggling in their marriages. And maybe God is saying, maybe you could be a marriage mentor and come alongside of another couple. Maybe God's placed a burden on your heart about youth. And you're like, oh my goodness, there's youth coming to Woodside. Maybe I can help out with the youth. Is there somewhere you can use me? Because I just want these youth to be blessed and loved by God. Maybe God has placed on your heart a burden to pray for a missionary, a particular missionary, or a particular humanitarian crisis. And Lord, I'm going to pray for that crisis. Maybe God has placed a burden on your heart for something outside of the walls, outside of this church. Lord, the homeless, I'm going to get involved with that ministry in that place. Or maybe it's, Lord, and you've got a burden for maybe missions, short-term or long-term, somewhere. God gives us burdens when we follow him. What bothers you? What's just like a righteous indignation? This is not right. This is not good. I want to help out. And often that burden points us to where God may use you. Woodside, we're celebrating 50 years coming up in the fall. We're going to be done our building renovation, Lord willing, in the fall, right? We're on mission together for God. That Woodside is about people living for the glory of God and the good of people. And we have seen this for the first 50 years of Woodside. And we're looking and praying that it will continue for the next years ahead. One of the things, I've mentioned this before, is that I had the privilege of knowing some older folks in our church, and they've gone to be with the Lord. And one after one after one of them, they just had hearts for the younger generation. That's why, singing these new songs, some of them didn't like it. They liked the old good hymns, but they sang those songs because they had a heart and they cared about those young people. They gave to that building addition, to this building. They gave, they prayed, they were involved, even though they wouldn't see these people that they were doing this for. I always loved just looking in the windows of our gymnasium on a Thursday night or a Friday night when we've got youth, and they're just having fun. And I think to myself about these people that gave to that project, even though they didn't know any of those kids, even though they didn't set foot in that gym. They may have once or twice for a potluck before they died. That was it, right? That was it. God stirred their hearts because they wanted the next generation to know about Jesus, about the love of Jesus and the love of God. And friends, they were faithful, and that's what he is calling us to, faithfulness. Nehemiah had a heart for people that were in great trouble and disgrace. And so should we. As we go forward as a church, logistics may change, our demographics may change, but we are called to have a heart of compassion for people that are broken, that need help. And just an FYI, we're all broken. We're all going to die. We all need Jesus. That people, when they come into this church, it should be a place of grace, of love. When we go out, we're bringing God's grace and love to people. Yes, we're a church of truth. We will continue to preach the truth of Jesus. And even though you present it in the best way, somebody probably is going to be offended because that's the nature of truth. It stings us, right? So truth, we will continue to present truth. And even if we're accused down the road of not being loving and it's not true, we're still going to preach truth. But truth is connected to love and grace. And like Jesus, we lead with love and grace. This church is to be a place where anybody, any broken person can come and hopefully find Jesus, the one who loved them, and gave himself for them. So Woodside, are you in? Are we together on a mission? Okay, I'm going to invite you to stand. And just before the worship team comes, would you just take a moment, and I'm going to invite you to bow your head. What is he saying to you today? What's on your heart? Where's your burden? You've got to have, if you don't have a burden, Lord, would you give me a burden? I need a burden for your glory. But what's God placed on your heart? And you begin to pray about it this week. Maybe if you're married as a couple, Lord, what is it that you want us to do? Lord, I want to live for your glory. We want to live for your glory.